Thanks, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Tableau, for providing the opportunity. My name is Vaidi, and I've been with GE for a little more than 2 years. I run analytics for marketing as part of GE Measurement and Control. And what I want to talk about today is, how you drive analytics adoption in a company as large as ours, right? And just a little bit on our organization. We're part of the GE oil and gas business. We call ourselves GE Measurement and Control. And we're in the business of providing healthcare for industrial assets. So if you think about gas turbines, oil and gas pipelines, and LNG pipelines and things that power the world economy, we make controls, protection equipment, sensors to protect those assets, to help those assets perform reliably, and drive outcomes for our customers. Our customer base, we're predominantly serving the oil and gas value chain, so anyone from explorers to drillers to transporters and marketers. But at the same time, we're also serving utilities, power gen, and jet engine manufacturers in the aerospace industry. And we have a broad presence across the whole globe, mostly North America, and more than 1,500 plus channels and direct sales as well as distributors. So a little bit about how my team is organized. So I am part of the strategic marketing group for Measurement and Control. There's 4 verticals within my department, and we report to the CMO. Now the other 3 verticals, we are collectively responsible for delivering market intelligence back to the business. So we look at the macro environment, industry indicators, competitor moves, and try to understand the strategic landscape. And what my function is doing is trying to drive deeper understanding of our customers, our markets, and our install base and our products that we build, right? So we can help our commercial teams be simpler and more efficient out on the field. Here's how we organize our operating model. So this is our charter. The 3 principles that we use to govern ourselves are: we want to be the conduit the business uses to collect data across all our systems, use it to drive both long-term strategic as well as short-term tactical objectives. We do it through Tableau end-user visualizations, and this is where the tool has been an amazing partner for us, a godsend, especially when it comes to driving adoption and getting data into the hands of the action owners who are closest to the customers and our operations. And it's essentially the combination of these things that helps deliver business benefit back to the business. And when we talk benefits, it's always revenues, costs, and productivity. But we always make it a point to measure what we are delivering. So we look at incremental sales. We look at how much cost we're saving as a result of improved productivity. And we also see what impact we're having on simplifying the business. Now, and I'll tell you why that's important. In the last couple of years, if you've been reading the Wall Street Journal, if you've been attending or hearing about GE presentations, one of the things we've been focusing on is using simplification to drive margin improvement for the business. And this is about reducing workflows, reducing the number of checks, getting 5 processes down to 2, and see how that productivity translates to margins and improved profitability. And here's how we've done so far. This is results aggregated over the past couple of years. Tremendous adoption across the business. On the left-hand side are some examples of projects we've worked on. We've had 50-plus power users currently using Tableau, 30-plus projects that are complete or ongoing. We've had significant adoption even outside of Measurement and Control. So at last count, I think there was about 1,000 licenses across all GE businesses that Tableau had sold. And this has translated to more than $20 million worth of sales and cost savings. So tremendous adoption, great results, and this is a journey that we hope to continue to develop as we go forward. So just before I handle the concept of adoption, I just want to do a quick, audience poll, just to sense who's in the room. So can we just do a quick show of hands to understand who is working in the oil and gas / heavy industrial space? Okay, not bad. And the others, how many of you are in organizations that are 5,000 plus employees? Okay, so that's pretty big. And of those, how many of you think that you've had a lot of success or a reasonable amount of success with driving analytics adoption? Now, would one of you maybe volunteer and say why that is the case? Why? What are a couple of reasons why analytics has been so big in your organization? I'm sorry, can you say that again? It was solving a problem. And were people really hungry for data? Were they asking you for dashboards? Was it being used for every kind of decision that was made to solve those problems? Okay. And for those who have found this challenging, can I know why? Is there a couple of volunteers who would like to say why? Yes. I was just going to say that one of the ways we got adoption is built into their operating budget. Yeah. That they have to, achieve this level of savings. Right. Got it. Now that's interesting feedback. And the reason that matters is, and I'm going to talk about it over the next few slides, is I just wanted to know, what is working and what's not working before we talk about how we've done this in our organization. So a couple of quotes I want to remind ourselves about before we go into adoption, and both come from our founder, Thomas Edison. And the first thing he said is that he wanted to find what the world needed, and he proceeded to invent it. And how that's pertinent to our mission is, as an analytics group, our job is to understand what is possible with data and use that understanding to feed back into products, into intelligent products that can drive decisions, right? Now, there's a second thing he said, which is not all that popular, is that the value of an idea lies in the using of it. Now, we all know Edison as being one of the most prolific inventors of all time. He was one of the greatest risk takers, but he was also an astute businessman. He knew that unless an invention can be combined with the principles of mass commercialization and with large-scale teamwork, you cannot really bridge the gap between producing something cool and innovative and getting people to use it and getting hundreds of millions of people to use that work. And if you translate that into what it might mean for GE today, specifically for analytics, we have a lot of ideas. We scale them all the time. But at the end of the day, it's very important that we make it applicable to our end customers. And that's how we get the most adoption. That's how we get the most traction. So what I want to do over the next few slides is just kind of go over some process things that we do to make sure we're not building tools in isolation, but actually working with our customers so they make good use of it. Also, I'm going to go over some real-life examples and projects that illustrate those processes that I'm going to talk about. So my first tip is we always like to start with questions, not requirements. And I'll tell you why that's important. I've seen in many companies, even in GE, where we use or we go about this process of developing dashboards as if it were an IT project. We have a defined deliverable. We have a defined path to get to that deliverable, right? And what I've seen is that constrains the discovery process. Analytics was meant to be a process where you engage with your stakeholders and you find new things along the way. You can't start with a defined requirement and end with a defined solution. So the approach we like to take is we have our stakeholders ask us very open-ended questions where that they're trying to answer to achieve their targets with a certain objective in mind. And we like to constrain the question as opposed to starting with a requirement. So we always go back and ask them. So if I'm the commercial leader and I want to leverage analytics to understand my underserved markets, and try to understand what are the better deals I need to go after in the next quarter. My question back to him is, what's the opportunity cost of doing nothing? How are you going about doing this? Why do you think this might help, right? If everything went well, what might a perfect answer look like? What's the estimated benefit? How would you measure success, right? And this helps me understand I'm going after the right problem that data can answer. And trust me, in a B2B world, there are several problems out there. And you know, GE survived. GE's been around for 100 plus years, and we survived. We were one of the top 10 Fortune 100 brands, even when analytics wasn't around. So analytics has to be used smartly in ways that it's useful for customers, that it's answering the right questions. So let's repeat that. Requirements constrain, questions empower. Start with questions and define your questions. Second tip, simple is underrated. And what that might mean is, I see a lot of mind-blowing models, very sophisticated visualizations, beautiful, meaningful, that don't quite see the light of the day, or that don't get to the next level because the audience didn't quite get it or wasn't quite coached to get it, right? So with that in mind, the way we scope our projects is we sit with our stakeholders and we ask them to help us understand what might be the quantified impact of doing this project for the organization, right? And we help them understand how hard this might be to do. So imagine a 3-hour discussion, right? We go through the wish list of questions we want to answer, and we evaluate the trade-off between the impact of doing something and the feasibility of it. Hopefully at the end of the 3 hours, we'll come up with 2 or 3 quick hits in the top right-hand quadrant that can deliver on a short-term opportunity, right? So simplest, underrated, the simplest projects can deliver the most benefit. Your visualization, your project, your analytics doesn't have to be super complicated to be beneficial for the organization. And make sure, never forget to quantify your goals. Sometimes, I would be the first to admit it is impossible to, pinpoint on how much dollars worth of benefit you can drive, but an estimate is usually good enough, right? And we're talking, in the order of a few thousands of dollars. An estimate that tells you how much adoption a certain project will have, how many users are potentially going to use it, and is it going to lead to 5 incremental sales? Is it going to lead us to drive an extra 10 defects, and what might be the cost savings attached to those defects, right? So quantify. Third tip, directional fast is always better than slow and perfect. What does this mean? In a company like GE, it is impossible to start with a goal where you're saying you're going to get everything right and be successful. So with that in mind, we like the Agile framework. I think it helps us scope projects where the outcome is very hard to predict, right? Sometimes when you start to mine data, you start with you don't know what you don't know, right? So the way we scope projects is we always start with the user story with a certain benefit, and we operate in 3-week chunks, right? Every 3 weeks, we'll have a work product, a deliverable that we'll validate with our stakeholders. And this is something we're not following just for analytics. Even product development is happening like this. And the way products are being built is, at the end of every 3 weeks, we call it a market validation stage. And we call it a stage where we'll seek feedback and we'll decide whether we need to persevere or pivot. Persevere would mean we would continue to hone what we develop. We see value in what's, in the product that we built thus far. And pivot would mean, we see this going nowhere, so we're better off spending our time on something else, right? So Agile, iterate, make sure you're not aiming for perfect outcomes. Strive for iteration. Now imagine you're at your first Agile checkpoint. You're showing this to your stakeholders. Let's say you're showing this to sales managers who have to look at your product and identify top 10 opportunities. And some of them, they're always going to say, hey, you know what, this is unusable. This doesn't make sense. How do you combat that? How do you respond to that, right? The way you respond to that is you say, in an organization where you have 30 different ERPs, where you have a lot of massaging of data going on, it is impossible to get everything right out the gate, right? Impossible to get everything right out the gate. If you're 70% there, and if your stakeholders is willing to engage to make it better, I think that should be a win. So I think we should all recognize that dashboards and visualizations, or any analytics product, when approached in an agile way, gives you starting point for discussions. It helps you ask critical questions and not necessarily give you, these magic bullet kinds of answers, right? So recognize the dashboard is starting point of a discussion. It's helping you ask a critical question that is developing the conversation further, which can evolve and benefit the rest of the organization, right? So how do we go about, closing the last mile gap? You've heard of the last mile being mentioned in several contexts. Telecommunications comes to mind, and even in analytics, I see several projects where we have a terrific product, except, and you wow the audience. Everyone's, really appreciative of the work you've done, and 6 months later you check and nothing's really happened, right? How do you make sure that doesn't happen? So I want to illustrate this with a couple of scenarios. The first scenario, and these are both real projects that we have worked on within measurement and control. The first scenario is one where I worked with the CMO and we developed a concept which we showed to executives first, and the organization-wide rollout happened after that. Okay, let's look at how that went. Okay. And the analysis that we did is that of understanding our product portfolio. I call it a long-tail analysis. Different companies call it different things. I've seen this being called a product portfolio profitability analysis as well. But just to give you a little bit of context, what is a long-tail distribution? Long-tail distribution, essentially, it's an adaptation of the Pareto principle, right? 80% of your sales come from 20% of your products. Different companies have used it in different ways, right? So on the top half of the slide, you have the Amazons and the Netflix and the iTunes, right, who have made advantageous use of the long tail by offering hard-to-find niche items at significant profits, right? And of course, they benefit from centralized warehousing, some of them with digital inventory. Now, if you switch context, if you think about a business like GE, the long tail actually hurts us. It's populated with options that are low value, they're low end, that really cost a lot of overhead, that cost a lot of commercialization money, very hard to sell. So the problem we were trying to understand was we wanted to know what our distribution looked like, what options populate this long tail, what's the composition of it, and can I segment these products by revenue and margin, just to help our product lines understand what's important and what's not, and what needs to be eliminated from the portfolio. So that was kind of the broader goal, right? And this came from our CMO and our product lines. So these are GMs, right? So here's what we did. We developed the framework. We demoed what's possible. And we came up with a few insights. We saw that 50% of our products, the bottom 50, contributed less than 5% of our sales. And that was incredible, right? Incredibly valuable. And we did this at the level of detail that could be actioned. So now you could segment your portfolio into, the concern areas, which is the bottom left-hand quadrant. You could look at what's the mass market, which is the high revenue, low CMs. You can look at what are the niche market, which is the high CMs and low revenues. And you can look at the superstars, right? So it was it was an intelligent view, something we'd never ever done before. But remember, this was still a concept for the executives, right? Let's see how implementation went. So we demoed this to executives, line managers, and as you might accept, not everyone was impressed, right? And I'll tell you why that is the case, right? Within GE, as I would expect in a lot of organizations, executive leaders, they tend to be innovators and early adopters. They really like to see how, and in fact, they want to see how analytics can tie to strategic objectives. Line managers, they're pragmatists. They have to make this work. For them, this is still pie in the sky, right? So how do you bridge that gap? How do you bring around these Michaela Maronis into your vision? So one process that we've used to bridge that gap is something called the GE workout. And this was something that was popularized by Jack Welch in the mid-'80s when he saw that we're getting too bureaucratic, we had too many product lines, and he wanted to figure a way out to accelerate change, to get away from business as usual, to get things done faster. I know a lot of organizations have since adopted the workout methodologies in their own. I know a couple, but I don't know, anyone from Exxon here? So I know of a couple of groups in Exxon that have implemented the GE workout. I know Ingersoll Rand might be doing this as well, and so have some of our customers. But the idea is you make the analytics applicable to the ones who are closest to the action, closest to the customers, closest to the decisions that can come out of the analytics you do, regardless of hierarchy. So this could be factory workers. This could be your manufacturing engineers. This could be your sales managers who are going out on the field, pitching a product to the client, right? And it involves 3 pillars, as I've laid them out here. Cohesion, very important, cross-functional participation. It needs the analytics to be delivered through a tailored curriculum, so in a language that they can understand. And it's a combination of these that will really help you prove value, right? Proving value is the key. An analytic solution that's pretty, that's beautiful, that gives you insights that wows the audience is not good enough until you prove value and tie the insight to short and long-term objectives. So as we went about this workout, which is a series of discussions we had over a couple of months with true cross-functional participation, what we did was we examined individual use cases with each of the participants, right? How could this long-tail analysis be applicable to what you're doing, right? How can I help bridge the gap between where you're currently at versus what you want to deliver at the end of this year, right? So if you look at pricing, we told pricing how they can raise prices for slow-moving items using the help of the long-tail analysis. We gave sales some recommendations on what are some ways to push replacements. How can you get rid of some of these obsoletes that are low revenue, low margin, and how can you identify some replacements, some upgrades that your customers would prefer. For product management, I think we have been in a process of simplification across the last couple of years, and they love the idea of using this to identify low-performing options that they could simply retire, right? Even quality benefited tremendously from this. Imagine some real low-performing products that are locking up the supply chain and are taking time away that engineering can spend on supporting some profitable products, right? And this, in turn, really hurts our customer responsiveness. It really hurts our on-time delivery and several other metrics. So the quality leaders love this as well. And engineering, helped with, engineering was helped because we helped them identify what products we could reallocate, what product spend we could reallocate to new NPIs, right? So the idea is you have all these participants, all these stakeholders, but unless you translate the broader objective and make it real, make it about them, they would still not come on board. But once you do, you'll see the behavior changes. And all of a sudden, you have a bunch of supportive stakeholders who want to work with you and help hone this. Right? And finally, let's also not forget the boring stuff. Right? And this is something I learned from a book called Lean Startup. It's being socialized across GE in the last couple of years. We want to be a simpler organization, want to function like a startup, right? And one of the things Eric Ries, who's the author who mentions this, a lot of ideas, a lot of innovations fail because they think that a product can sell itself. A product, if it's beautiful, it's cool, it can operationalize itself without the basics, which is measuring success, setting milestones, developing action plans, making sure people are following up on those action plans, right? So we ended these discussions not just by exploring all these use cases, but also identifying how we can go back to our factories and operationalize some of these findings, right? And that's how you convert the laggards and make them into innovators and adopters. So this is the second scenario that I want to talk about, a little different from the very first one. And how this is different is we got the question from the line managers. So the sales managers worked with us to co-create this tool, and we worked with them to operationalize the rollout strategy as well. And the analysis here I'm going to talk about is visualizing our opportunities, our install base, to identify what are the cross-sells, the upsells we can do, what are the underserved markets out there, what are the deals we should be chasing versus others, right? And we built a beautiful visualization, but even post-implementation, what we did was we participated in the sales reviews. We guided effective use. I think one of the things I've seen happen a lot of time is unless you train, unless you coach on how to specifically navigate the dashboard to get to a certain result, the dashboard gets used in the wrong way. So you have to kind of handhold the first couple of iterations, right, of the dashboard use. After that, it can be self-serve all you want. But the first couple of iterations, you have to participate in the operational reviews, see how the dashboard's getting used, and try to understand if they're simply supporting what they already know about the field or actually using this to learn something new. I think that's very important as well. Because if they're doing only the former, this needs more work, right? If all they're doing is using the dashboard to support an existing hypothesis, and I'll come to that a little later, your dashboard is not good enough. There's more work to be done. So now that you have a product, you have your stakeholders engaged, you've conducted a workout, everything's good, hopefully you got promoted for your work, how do you get validation that this effort was successful, right? I think this is incredibly important, and I see this, I see people flouting this a lot of time, right? We have great dashboards. We send out, communication to the entire organization that something's been launched, and 6 months later you check back, the person's either not in the same role, or the dashboard is still there, and we have no way of cracking. And let me clarify. Cracking doesn't mean utilization. If the way you're tracking how well your dashboard's getting used is by seeing how much it's getting viewed, that's not success. For all you know, someone might be just looking at it 10 times a day and not doing anything with it, right? So here's some techniques we've used to track success, right? First technique. Did I tell you something you didn't already know? I think I mentioned this a little earlier, and here's a real example of a project. So this was something we worked on for our Pipeline Integrity Solutions group, and the ask was to project forward demand for pipeline inspection services, right, with two objectives. One, we want to give our sales guys visibility into what opportunities arise at what point in time, so they can go talk to the customers and be proactive about engaging with them before, these guys send out RFPs to competition, right? So that was one. Two, we want to be able to better predict how much tool and inventory to have in stock when an opportunity arises, so we don't miss it, right? So that was the ask. Now, if I had gone about and answered just that question, I wouldn't be doing enough, right? Because by doing that, all I would be doing is answering in a better way, in a prettier way, what they could have gotten to through 5 other techniques, right? So I had to give them something extra. And what I did was I told them, hey, this is your opportunity projected into 2020, but did you also know that 50% of all that potential is rekindled candidates? These are customers that you once inspected that haven't come back to you in years. What's going on? Think about marketing 101. It takes 7 times as much money to acquire new customers as it does to retain existing ones, right? And that was the aha moment for them. It's very important that you give them something that they couldn't have gotten from other sources, and that's what makes a dashboard stick, right? So here's us sticking with the same example, right? We rolled out the dashboard. Everyone likes it. How do we know we're doing well, right? Are the forecasts really helping, right? Is it improving how we're able to target? Is it improving our ability to respond to customers? And we've looked at a bunch of metrics. You can call them KPIs to help validate how the dashboard is doing. So we've looked at forecasts versus actuals. We've looked at our win-loss rate, right? So one of the things this visualization or this analysis was supposed to do was help us target better, right? Did this improve our win rate? Now, it's interesting that when we did this, we found that our win rate was good in USA and Canada, but not in other regions. So we used that feedback to refine the model. And of course, your win rate could be a function of several other things, not just your ability to act on an insight, but it was still valuable advice that we used to refine the model, right? Variance to customer want dates. Are we being more responsive, right? So this is just a handful of metrics, but key message here is you want to measure the state of affairs before launch and after launch, and you want to measure that periodically, constant intervals of time, and of course use that insight as a feedback loop to refine your work. Another example. This one is more of a quality example, and I know I mentioned we primarily serve marketing, but we've been victims of our own success, and over the past few months we've done a lot of work with quality in manufacturing and sourcing as well. So here's an example where we worked with the quality organization and helped them understand what were the key drivers of cost of quality for the business, right? And this was launched, and I always go back to my stakeholders to collect evidence of action, right? Collect stories that tell me that, if the dashboard's telling you something, we're taking the necessary steps to get to that point where we can fix a broken process or drive some sort of behavioral change that benefits the organization. So in this case, as you see, we saw an anomalous scrap event, right? It's clearly an outlier, clearly outside of the 3 standard deviations that you might expect. Turns out it was an accelerometer. It prompted a question, right? Was it a supplier issue? Turns out it was, except it was scrapped for a reason as flimsy as that part not having SAP serial numbers on it. And that prompted another question. Should we be scrapping something for this? Couldn't this have been reworked? Couldn't this have been reworked at vendor cost, right? And that's essentially what we ended up doing. So as you see, we traced the effect from the cause, or rather the cause from the effect through layers of abstraction, and we used that to prove that this was generating value for the business, right? And this is just one such use case. So we talked about measuring before and after, but showing evidence of action collecting these stories really helps support your case a lot more. Now here's another example that I always caution my team on, is that we always have a tendency to work on stuff where someone's just asking us to do an analysis, and all they want us to do is, support a broader sentiment that's out there, right? Now, the analysis I'm referring to here is an econometric model, right? So our product lines do this every quarter, right? We look at our results, we see if it was a good quarter or a bad quarter, and we want to understand what are we forecasting for the business as a function of industry indicators and economic indicators, right? And the goal is to try to understand was this quarter a consequence of how the market is doing, or was it something, with orders execution? Was it us or was it the market, right? Now, we used econometrics, and we built a great tool to terrific feedback, except after a few iterations, after a few quarters, we saw that we were almost always agreeing with the broader sentiment, right? So that, that made us think, what's the purpose of doing an analysis where you're always, just making your stakeholders feel good, right? It's important that you challenge the existing thinking. It's important that you're, at times, counterintuitive, right? Sometimes I'll just put a crazy number out there just to see how people react to it, right? Just making them feel good, and just understanding if they're happy about your work isn't good enough. Sometimes you have to have that little bit of friction to engage in a meaningful discussion that benefits the business. So just make sure, if you're always confirming a hypothesis, and don't get me wrong, there's entire industries out there where there's merit to confirming a hypothesis. Healthcare comes to mind, pharmaceuticals comes to mind, right? I think there's a lot of value in conducting as many experiments as you can, to confirm a drug is supposed to perform the way it should, so we don't kill people. But in a B2B industrial world, I don't think, you have to spend a lot of time confirming a hypothesis. You can try to add to what's known, but the objective should always be to challenge how the business thinks about something. So just summarizing the keys to adoption, and I would love to hear from the audience as to how they've gone about this journey, what's some of your own experiences have been. But just to summarize, don't box yourself into requirements. Ask questions, surprise a stakeholder. Your stakeholders don't necessarily always know what the solution needs to be. They have a sense for the objective, but they have no idea how to get there. And it's your job to help them get there in your own innovative way. 2, you got to remember 80-20, right? Always go after the low-hanging fruit first. Understand that some of the easiest solutions, the easiest analysis can generate the most impact. You don't have to go after complicated visualizations when you really don't need to. Be agile, iterate, strive for iteration, not perfection, right? Evaluate your work, seek market validation or customer validation at regular points in time, and work with your stakeholder to refine the input. Never act in isolation. Executive sponsorship is never good enough. This is kind of counterintuitive to how I used to think about analytics. I mean, I came to GE after a career in consulting, and back then you always sought executive buy-in first, and that was the end of that. But what I'm doing now is very, very different from my previous roles. This is, I think, the first time where I'm not just publishing insight, but working with the organization to make sure it gets used and it gets measured on, right? So just because you have executive buy-in, it's not good enough. You have to convert the action owners, the ones who are closest to the customer, closest to your processes, and are in a position to take decisions using the insights you've mined, right? Aim for novel insights. Don't always publish stuff that agrees with the broader sentiment. You're not adding no value if you're doing that all the time, right? Facilitate action. Very, very important. I think a lot of analytics teams I've worked with, and this is more so in consulting than in corporate, they feel and they have a sense that once you publish something, once you wow someone, and once you have enough to get the client to come back to you and you have, one repeat business, your job's done. But I think the analytics team's role to take that next step as well. You may not be the action owners, but you have to facilitate how the action owners can learn from what you've done. It may not always be intuitive. So you have, even if it's the most intelligent visualization you've ever built, you have to kind of take that next step to make it real. And finally, you have to prove value by measuring success. Show evidence of action. Show evidence, quantitative evidence that your analysis is actually helping the business. And make sure you maintain a fine balance between anecdotal and quantitative. Right? Sometimes I've seen people just publish anecdotal evidence and just say, hey, this is helping me save hours worth of productivity. Right? That's usually not good enough. Labor productivity is a great goal. It shaves a lot of time off people's daily jobs, and it can be great for commercial simplification. But it cannot be, among the top 2 or 3 things you're aiming for. Top 2 or 3 things should always be incremental sales, huge cost savings, and process change, behavioral change that helps the organization. Labor productivity is good, but it shouldn't be the ultimate goal, right? And that's how you get progress. And I'd love to take questions with that. Yes.
How much time do you find you spend on average tracking your successes? I mean, for us, I find we don't. I run an analytics department.
Yep.
We don't because we're on the past. And I always rather dedicate resources to something new rather than
Yeah.
track success. And I totally understand how it impacts our ability to showcase our value to the business.
Yeah.
But I just can't conceive dedicating 1 or 2 bodies.
No, and I think the question was, how do you track success? I think they're always flooded with requests, and how do you identify how, to devote time to tracking success, right? I would say work with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are who are consuming the tool, right? If you have put something out and you haven't, I was interacting with, I think someone from Exxon earlier today, and one of the things they mentioned was sometimes they put something out and they wait for 6 months and nothing's going on, right? That's not a good story, right? So you have to constantly check back with the stakeholders and make them accountable, right? You work with them. You spend 3 months on a project that was designed for them, that they're using, right? Why should they not be accountable to tell you how they're using it, right? I think the analytics team has to be involved, but it's a cross-functional effort to track success as well. I mean, does that answer your question?
I guess I partially want to know if you look at sort of correctly effort, you say
Yeah.
10-15% of your team's time is spent tracking. How much time do you actually spend tracking success versus doing
In terms of time, I would say it's only about 10%. Yes, but sometimes all it takes is a call, an email. Get people for 30 minutes, an hour, every other week. See how you're doing, right? And I'm telling you, if it's not helping, they would be emphatic about it, right? And I know there's people who just click on the dashboard. If it's not working, they'll go back to doing their own thing. Well, those ones you'll know right away, right? But if they're not, if they think this is something that'll help them and it's not, they will be emphatic about it. They will let you know. They'll be loud and clear. So sometimes, like I said, all it takes is an email, call, but it has to be done, in periodic intervals. I saw a couple of other hands go up. Yes.
How do you facilitate action if you lose ownership
organizational structure. What steps can you take if you don't have any real authority or power after?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. So the way I would answer that is, I think your first part of the question is kind of the answer, right? You have to make sure that you don't completely lose ownership, right? You have to make your action owners responsible for reporting back to you, right? And that kind of ties with that little cost of quality example out there, right? You engage with them, you collect stories, right? Every other week. Hey, can you give me a couple of examples of actual project events or project process fixes that resulted from this dashboard? And if there's pin drop silence in the call, you ask them to be candid. Hey, we spent 3 months doing this. Is everything fine? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not, right? So even if you don't have ownership of the action, you have to hear back from your stakeholders as to how they're using this. It's very, very important. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good. Yes?
Hi, related to kind of a CMO organisation, so am I.
Yeah.
You're the marketing role in this. From the business you work in,
Mm-hmm.
I'm imagining a lot of your core products that you sell to your customers are control systems, measurement systems,
That's right.
etc. What you've described is obviously analysis of your pipeline.
Right, this is all business analytics, right.
To what extent are you, or is there an opportunity for you to use Tableau as part of the visualization to sit on top of your control systems?
Wow, we've never explored that, but I know there is a business within GE, and we call it GE Research or GE Software, that is working on packaging analytics into solutions and products we sell to customers, right? And we have a whole initiative around this. I'm sure you've been watching commercials of talking about the industrial internet, right? And it aired on Thursday Night Football. I think Jeff Immelt and everyone at corporate has been talking about it. This is the idea of putting sensors on our products, using that to predict performance and helping drive outcomes for customers. But those are more sophisticated analytics. We're talking several petabytes worth of data that sensors collect, as opposed to a few million rows that we can use to drive business analytics. But I take your point. I think that's something we haven't explored, but we have a business that's looking at this, looking at analytics for customers as well. Yes.
When you're executing these projects, what sort of skills do you desire the most from your team?
Yes, so I would say, yes. So the question was, when you're executing these kinds of projects, what skills do you desire the most from the team? So actually I had a slide on that. I don't think I have it on this presentation, but typically it would be, someone who's very well engaged cross-functionally, so which is why we're reporting to the CMO, right? He understands the goals of the commercial teams, right? And someone who understands the data science aspect of it, as well as how this data science can be translated to what matters to the business, right? And we have a lot of analysts and statisticians and data visualization experts that are part of this team. And a lot of them are part of my group. We also hire consultants when we have some specialized work that we need to do that we don't have the skill set for. But typically internally is how we execute 80% of the work we do. So typically I would say data experts, and this is data analysts, visualization experts. And we also have a BI team, which is not my team, that owns the infrastructure that we interact with heavily, right? So they own our SAP, our Oracle, and our Salesforce.com systems, and they're responsible for kind of provisioning the data that we use, right? But internally, we don't necessarily do data pulls. We interface with the BI team to get that information. We focus all our time on analysis and socializing the analysis, right? And if I divide my time into, if I look at, what I spend my time on, I would say 50% of our time is analysis, 50% is socialization. And of the 50% that we spend on analysis, 70% is just getting a handle on the data. And, the next 20 to 30 is, kind of analyzing and figuring out what's meaningful and what's insightful. Yeah, perfect. Yes?
If you could go back to your slide where you had the structure of your organization.
Yes. Let's see. Yep.
There's always going to be interdependence from market and competitive intelligence on customer intelligence
Yes.
and on programs. How do you make sure that information from one flows into the other seamlessly, although it's being delivered by different organizations to the same customers?
Okay, understand. So the way I would answer that is, our products are not necessarily being used by the other three verticals, right? So it's if you think about it, an amalgamation of all four verticals is what our stakeholders use, right? So I provide analytics tools. There's another vertical that provides market intelligence, so competitor deep dives, trying to understand, what an Emerson or what a Honeywell is investing in, what their quarterly numbers look like, and
let me get a little more specific.
Yes.
Where you have macroeconomic factors,
Yes.
those definitely impact your customers, not just your products.
Yeah.
How do you make use of both macroeconomic variables
Yeah.
in both places
Yeah.
while they may drive different set of actions when you look at it from a competitive perspective versus from your own customers?
Right. Yeah, the macroeconomic indicators we use as only to target what investments we need to focus on. That's kind of the use for this. So if you're seeing, the subsea space is not going to do very well in the next, 2 to 3 quarters, we will use that to develop conversations with our sensors product line and try to help them, target other areas of interest, right? So macroeconomic indicators are used to understand, spaces of interest, white spaces, where we might want to invest in, where our customers are investing in, but it doesn't necessarily tie with analytics per se, apart from that little econometrics example I showed you, right? Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Good.
You talked about making stakeholders accountable for actions. What are some techniques?
Yeah. So what I would do is, one of the processes we've used was a GE workout, right? Have it be cross-functional and have them report out on, and when I say report out, this is a GE term, this is essentially reporting back to leadership and your functions as to how they're using the tool and how it's delivering benefits, right? I think that's got to be set in stone in their calendars at periodic intervals of time. And they're not using it, if nothing's coming of it, we wouldn't have a lot of participation. But if you sense that you have a good amount of acceptance, they'll have a lot to say, right? And the other thing I like to do is, as I told the other gentleman, always check back and see how you can refine the input. Is this helping? Is there something else we can do, right? So I would say making them accountable is all about giving them a need to get back to you, right? If your product isn't good enough, then they won't feel the need to be accountable, right? Sometimes they think, hey, you know what, this is great. It's helping me visualize my install base by, turbine type, by sales manager, but it might also be nice if I could understand this by X, Y, and Z parameter, right? And he'll get back to you, and that's accountability, right? Accountability is giving them some skin in the game, right? Yes.
Since you had a different BI team as well.
Yes.
How do you control the internal, if I can call it conflict of interest, them trying to say we can also do the same thing that you are trying to cater,
Yeah, yeah.
How do you control that?
No, that's a good question. I think so. The BI team, I would say, is responsible mostly for data provisioning and owning the infrastructure. They have some analytics, but we kind of, tackle the harder problems, the ones that have a specific outcome. So, let's say we're trying to do something like KPI development for a broad base of stakeholders, right? And imagine that being something not requiring a specialized skill set. The BI team can take that on, right? But we work on specialized requests, specialized problems where you need a certain amount of visualization / statistics expertise. Yeah. But like I said, analytics has been completely democratized across GE. I don't want anyone to think that we're the only one doing analytics. That's not the case. Everyone is doing analytics. Self-service here to stay. But that being said, my group and the way we have implemented this is with a focused approach on a certain set of customers, figure out what they need, develop a solution, operationalize it. But there might be other needs that might be easy, right? That may not necessarily need an analytics expert, right? I mean, engineers have their own visualizations. They do, shop floor manufacturing KPI analysis on a day-to-day basis, and I don't do any of that, right? So easier stuff, things that are easy to turn around, self-service, right? Okay, sure. Yes. That's a good one. So we like to think about this as a collaborative approach, right? I won't exist without BI. All my data, the BI functional leaders, they have to teach me how to interpret that data because I don't own the data, right? Let me give you a very quick example, and this is something that I see in GE, but I'm sure that's the case with a lot of B2B organizations. We don't even have a consistent way of defining our customers because we sell, predominantly through channels, right? We track our customers based on ship to location, sold to location, right? And there's a bill to location, so who is paying the invoice may not necessarily be who we are shipping the product to, right? So imagine if someone asked me to understand, in fact, that's a project I'm currently working on, someone asked me to understand churn for the business, right? How do I know what customers to count? How do I know who's a channel partner versus who is an end user, right? So these are things that I cannot deduce without the help of BI functional leaders. So we cannot exist without them, and they cannot exist without us. Yeah. Yes?
How do you sell the Agile methodology
Mm-hmm.
in your organization?
Yeah.
People that are very accustomed to Six Sigma, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Waterfall.
Yeah. The good thing is I don't have to because the organization is completely sold on it. We have Agile, and we call it FastWorks within our business. We have Agile and FastWorks being used even to develop products, as I said, right? And product development is a little different, except the pivot versus persevere point that I talked about, right? That is where we get market validation. So imagine I'm building a sensor. A sensor might take, an intelligence sensor, it might take, I would say, 8 to 12 months to build. But I collaborate with a customer. I recruit them for a beta. And in 4 months, I have a product that is minimally viable or that can get to market validation, right? And we show it to the customer, and we get an order, right? And that's how Agile works. And what Agile has really helped us do is it is a great way to know if you're overcommitting resources, right? And it applies as much to analytics as anything else, right? you know right away, within 2 to 3 weeks, from an analytics standpoint, if this is something you want to continue to spend time on or not, right? And that immediate feedback loop is huge. And to the second part of your question, when you have existing frameworks like Six Sigma and traditional project management, right? How does Agile contrast with that? I think Agile sells itself because with traditional project management methods, you have a fixed timeline, and it's impossible to have a fixed timeline for an analytics project, right? Sometimes you discover over the course of your analysis that you're going down the wrong path. Or maybe if you did X and Y instead of Z, you'll have an answer that is minimally viable, that's usable right out the gate, right? And it turns out that we originally planned 6 months for that. Turns out we got it done in a couple, right? So with traditional project management, you have to fix the timeline. With Agile, that timeline is flexible. I think that is the biggest selling point to me. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. And one of the things I wanted to remind, and I don't have it on my slide, is I think there's a customer feedback form on the app that I would encourage you to fill out. And I hope this was helpful, and you can take this back to your own organizations and be better analytics practitioners. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.